I was stuck at an airport lounge in Chicago last week, one of those endless mechanical delays.
Oh, the worst.
The worst. And to my left, there was a woman, glasses on a chain, reading a copy of The Atlantic. She lets out this incredibly loud theatrical sigh.
Uh-oh.
And she starts muttering to her companion about the absolute incompetence of the airline.
Yeah.
She said it was a perfect metaphor for late-stage capitalism and that the snack selection was, and I quote, actively hostile to anyone with a gluten intolerance.
And actively hostile.
Right.
Wow.
Then, a few seats over, there's this guy in a crisp golf shirt just aggressively scrolling through a stock picker on his phone. He flags down a server, but not to order anything.
To complain.
To complain. He said he paid a hell of a lot of money for this membership, and the service was a disgrace. Then he says, this whole country is going downhill because nobody knows how to do their damn job anymore.
So you had it in stereo.
I just sat there, listening to both of them. And it hit me. These two people would probably despise each other on site. They would disagree on absolutely every political issue you could name.
I'm sure.
But in that moment, they were in perfect, unrecognized harmony. Both wealthy, both privileged, and both absolutely convinced that they were the primary victims of a system that was failing them.
It's the same impulse?
Exactly. The same tone, the same entitlement, the same deep-seated grievance. And I realized their politics were just different flavors of the same core impulse. And that moment, really, it encapsulates why we're doing this deep dive.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to unpack the psychological, the political, and the cultural roots of this pervasive sense of victimhood and constant complaining we see everywhere in modern society.
It really is everywhere.
We're going to explore how this behavioral pattern is formed, not just in our habits, but, structurally in our own brains. Then we'll look at how it's strategically weaponized by political leaders to build these loyal, angry identities.
And finally, the cost. What is the long-term cost to us, both as individuals and as a society that's trying to solve actual complex problems?
Exactly.
And it's an exploration that forces us to move beyond just judging a complaint. Is it justified? Is it not? That's not really the point.
Right.
We need to analyze grievance as a mechanism, a powerful engine that runs on repetition, entitlement, and, frankly, the need for status. What's so fascinating here is that the feeling of being wronged, it's no longer just a reaction to injustice. It's become a strategy for self-identity. It's a currency for political status.
But in the personal habit feeds a massive political machine.
That's the connection we need to unpack.
Okay, so let's unpack this starting with the personal cost, because the cumulative effect of a chronic complaint it's really a self-inflicted psychological wound. We need to understand how the brain learns this behavior.
It is a learned behavior.
I was reading about this guy, let's call him Mark. He's a project manager, California tech suburb, successful, high salary, outwardly, thriving. But his default mode is just constant negativity.
I think we all know a Mark.
We do. He's always complaining.
Yeah.
The 10-minute wait for coffee is a scandal. The driver in the next lane is an existential threat. His boss's email tone is an insult.
Total catastrophe, all of it.
And his partner, she tries to support him, but she starts to notice this terrifying pattern. Mark's habit of venting about trivial stuff has fundamentally hollowed out his emotional tools.
That's a powerful way to put it. Hollowed out.
Because when she had a genuine shattering adversity, her mother got seriously sick, Mark seemed incapable of coping. He couldn't help solve the actual complex problems. He just retreated into complaining about the hospital parking in the slow elevator.
Because that's what his brain was trained to do.
He had trained his mind to handle only minor annoyances, which left him incredibly fragile when true stress hit.
And that fragility, that inability to shift gears and handle a genuine crisis is rooted directly in the physical structure of the brain. We often think of our minds as, static, like a computer built with fixed hardware.
Right, like it is what it is.
But they are, in fact, constantly adapting and remodeling themselves based on what we do and what we think. This remarkable malleability is neuroplasticity. Our brains are literally being re-engineered by our experiences, behaviors, habits, and, most importantly here, our repetitive thought patterns.
That famous quote sums this up so well. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
It's the foundational concept, really, popularized by the work of Donald Hebb. Hebb's principle explains how repeated, synchronous activity between neurons strengthens the connection between them.
So it's like a physical reinforcement.
Think of it like walking a path through a field of tall grass. The first time is difficult, right? The grass springs back. But if you walk that same path every single day, you create a deeply grooved automatic trail.
It becomes the path of least resistance.
Precisely. In the brain, this strengthening happens through physiological changes. You get more receptors at the synapse, the myelin sheathing around the neural axon gets stronger, making that pathway incredibly fast and efficient.
So when Mark repeatedly complained about the coffee wait or the slow driver, he wasn't just, blowing off steam. He was structurally reinforcing a neural superhighway dedicated to negativity.
Yes, he was literally training his brain to default to the complaint loop. And this process is chemically reinforced too. Complaining often triggers a cascade of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, which in the short term can feel intensely motivating or validating.
Like you're doing something about it.
Right. But when that stress response becomes the default reaction to minor things, the brain essentially learns that the quickest, most efficient path to process information is through frustration and negativity. The negative response actually becomes faster than the logical, problem-solving one.
And this learned behavior, it supercharges something that we already have, right? The negativity bias.
The negativity bias is an evolutionary adaptation. Your brain naturally tends to focus more intensely on negative circumstances, on threats or insults, than on positive ones.
Survival and
Absolutely. Negative stimuli produce significantly more neural activity. They're perceived more easily and more quickly because, historically, noticing the lion in the grass was a lot more important for your survival than appreciating a beautiful sunset.
Sure.
But when chronic complaining kicks in, through the repetition we just described, you are taking that natural, slight evolutionary bias and you are turning it into an active, conscious behavioral program.
So you're pouring gasoline on it.
You're training your neural machinery to become exponentially efficient at scanning the environment for things that are wrong while simultaneously weakening your capacity for gratitude or perspective.
So if it's not just normal worry or processing, what exactly separates this destructive complaint loop from, constructive analysis? How do we know when we've crossed that line into the dangerous psychological territory you mentioned?
That line is crossed when the thought pattern becomes rumination.
Ruminate.
In the psychological context, rumination is defined by its passivity and its lack of resolution. It's the focused attention on the symptoms of your own mental distress. The pain, the anger, the frustration, passively and repetitively focusing on causes and consequences without any move toward resolution or action.
It's like chewing on a problem without ever swallowing it.
That's a perfect analogy. You're just compulsively chewing over a negative idea or problem without ever digesting it.
And the research on this is pretty stark. This is far from a benign bad habit. It's intrinsically linked to the anxious and depressed brain.
That is the crucial clinical takeaway. Psychologists term the compulsive behavior of chronic complainers as rumination, and they note it is directly related to the depressed and anxious state.
It's not just a symptom then.
It's more than that. Rumination is a highly stable cognitive constant over time, and it's a powerful predictive risk factor for serious clinical conditions. I'm talking major depression, general anxiety disorder, eating disorders, even PTSD and self-injurious behaviors. The implication here is enormous. The habit of constant complaint is not just annoying to people around you. It is neurochemically changing your brain to sustain and worsen your distressed mood.
It sounds like the brain gets caught in an inhibitory control failure. It knows the negative thought is unhelpful, but it just can't stop cycling through it.
Exactly. Rumination results in impaired inhibitory control. You can't just choose to stop the negative thought loop because those highly reinforced neural pathways we talked about override the prefrontal cortex's ability to inject reason or, change the subject.
So all your mental energy is just gone.
The entire mental effort is devoted to dwelling on past failures and negative thoughts, which blocks the resources you need for actual problem solving. This is why people stuck in rumination feel so profoundly fatigued. They are doing immense mental work that yields zero constructive output.
Okay, so if complaining is so detrimental, why do we do it? We rationalize it. We call it venting. We feel this urgent, almost biological need to just get the emotion out.
And that brings us to the paradox of venting. We have to separate the immediate need for release from the long-term outcome.
Okay.
Psychologists have a term for this practice of excessively discussing personal problems within a relationship. They call it co-rumination.
Co-rumination.
And there is a scientific basis for that initial relief you feel. When you put distressing emotions into words, a process often called name it to tame it, you actually deactivate the amygdala.
The brain's threat detector.
Exactly. And you activate the frontal lobe, which handles logic and executive functions. This immediately fulfills a core human need for connection and for affirmation.
That's the relief that Mark's partner, Sarah, felt when she listened to him. She was affirming his connection. She was helping.
Right. But that relief is often very misleading. The failure point is that venting typically lacks the second crucial step, which is perspective, a genuine shift in your thinking or a plan for corrective action.
So it's all heat, no light.
Precisely. Think of a common scenario, say two teachers validating each other's distress over a difficult student, let's call him Billy. Teacher A and teacher B meet for coffee.
Right.
They spend an hour validating each other's outrage. Billy was terrible today. He was even worse for me yesterday. They affirm the anguish, the shared sense of victimhood, but they never once discuss what to do differently in the classroom.
They just pull the mental junk out of the closet, show it to each other, and then collaboratively shove it back in without ever cleaning or organizing it.
And that's why venting often becomes the illusion of progress. It's emotional stimulation that provides temporary relief to your amygdala, but there's no logical action or structural change to the problem, internal or external.
It's saccharine problem solving.
I love that phrase. It feels good because the connection need was met, but all you've done is reinforce the negative habit of complaint and solidify the belief that the problem is unsolvable. And this perpetual co-rumination, it exacts a heavy cost on relationships. It turns supportive partners into unwilling custodians of chronic negativity.
Which leads to burnout and withdrawal.
Of course.
So the question becomes, how do we revamp this system? How do we take that powerful impulse to process feelings and turn it into something genuinely constructive instead of just a shared downward spiral?
We need a system, a healthy process-progress ratio for handling any grievance.
A process-progress ratio.
This ratio is essential because it delineates two necessary and distinct phases for healthy grievance management. It acknowledges the legitimate neurological need to process emotion, but it mandates a subsequent move toward action and resolution. This is how we avoid the rumination trap.
Okay, let's break that down. Phase 1, processing mode. This is where we get the feelings out, but with a specific, structured inquiry. We focus on what am I feeling, why am I feeling this way, and how is it affecting me?
And the key here is emotional specificity. You have to move beyond the vague umbrella term of stress or anger. Is the stress actually masking disappointment because you felt undervalued? Is the anger actually sadness because you lost control over a meaningful project?
So you can't just say, I'm stressed.
You have to clarify the precise, granular emotion. It's non-negotiable because you manage anxiety very differently than you manage resentment. If the processing stays abstract, it stays unhelpful, and the problem stays lodged in your emotional center.
And once we achieve that specificity, we pivot immediately to phase 2, progress mode. This is the mandatory move toward resolution.
Yes. Progress mode is about deciding how to move forward, identifying new thoughts or actions. You have to finish the thought process with a concrete, actionable commitment.
Like what?
It requires statements like, now that I've processed the anger over the delay, I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon focusing on the 3 things I can control. Or, my next step is to write a revised proposal outlining exactly what I need from my manager.
So without a progress mode, the time spent processing is just rumination disguised as a conversation.
Exactly.
I think this structure is incredibly powerful because it's not just a tool for self-help. It's a necessary mechanism for setting boundaries with the chronic complainers in your life. If you find yourself becoming a dumping ground for a colleague who only wants to stay in vent mode in co-rumination, you can explicitly use this framework to interrupt the spiral.
You can clarify the expectation. You can say, I hear your frustration and I'm here for you, but let's agree that after 5 more minutes of processing this, we pivot to action. What is the one thing we can do differently next week?
It changes the entire dynamic.
It changes the relationship from a shared downward psychological spiral to genuine supportive collaboration. And if you, the listener, don't enforce that second phase, you are contributing not only to your own exhaustion, but to the other person's inability to escape that negative wiring we discussed.
Okay, so we've established that constant complaint is a self-inflicted psychological trap. It literally erodes our ability to cope. Now let's zoom out to the public sphere, because this individual impulse is being actively monetized and weaponized on a massive political scale.
The machine we talked about earlier.
The machine. The most recognizable version of this is the politically divided family dinner. Imagine Thanksgiving. David, the uncle, has been marinating in a specific cable news perspective for months. He sits down, and before the turkey is even carved, he starts. It's just unbelievable what they are doing to this country. They're destroying everything.
We've all been at that table.
And his college-aged niece, who follows a completely different set of media influencers, looks up, equally exhausted and angry. Her feed tells her that David's side is the one destroying everything. The argument that follows isn't a debate over policy.
Not at all.
It's two people reciting amplified, rehearsed grievances learned from media and political figures. They are united only in their shared feeling of self-righteous anger.
That anecdote illustrates the exact moment when personal feelings of being wronged are transformed into a political identity and a political strategy. In contemporary politics, this sense of victimhood is ubiquitous, and often it's driven by what researchers call self-defined victimhood.
Self-defined victimhood.
It's a psychological state where an individual feels victimized, irrespective of any actual legal status or, objective truth.
So the perception of being wronged is the victimhood.
Yeah.
And that perception is enough to drive political action.
Exactly. The feeling matters more than the reality in terms of mobilization. And the appeal of this status is enormous. Victimhood provides clear psychological and social benefits.
Like what?
Well, for one, it's an excellent defense against personal failure. It wasn't my incompetence. It was the system that failed me. It provides a moral high ground, a sense of superiority. And most critically, in our contemporary moral hierarchy, victimhood confers social and political status.
How so?
Society is conditioned to listen to, and often grant concessions to, those who claim the label of victim. It's an instant elevation in moral stature.
And this political victim identity, I've seen it broken down into two distinct manifestations based on how the individual attributes blame.
Correct. The key is blame attribution, and it allows us to analyze political appeals that cut across partisan lines. The first type is systemic victimhood. This individual attributes blame outwardly onto broad, powerful, often abstract systemic entities, the world, the deep state, late-stage capitalism, or the powers that be that are designed to keep them down. Systemic victims look externally to understand their individual suffering.
And what about the second type, the more egocentric approach?
That is egocentric victimhood, which is intensely inwardly focused. The blame attribution here is less systematic and more personal. These individuals are driven by a strong, often subconscious sense of entitlement.
The people in the airport lounge.
Very possibly. They feel they never get what they deserve, that they're always settling for less, or that unfairness only targets them personally. It's a deep sense of cosmic injustice.
This distinction is crucial because it helps us understand the effectiveness of different political rhetorics. What does the empirical analysis tell us about the behaviors linked to these two types?
We can measure them. And studies show that systemic victimhood correlates strongly with blaming specific large entities, the political system, specific federal government agencies, or the economy broadly. Egocentric victimhood, however, is much less systematic in its specific targets.
It's more of a general feeling of being cheated.
It is. When tested in one study, the only specific entity egocentric victims significantly pointed to was the economy, and it was often framed as, the recession hit me harder than others, not, the system is fundamentally broken. This confirms the difference lies in the mechanism of the complaint. One blames the structure, the other blames the personal, undeserved hardship.
Okay, now we get to the manipulation point. We know this feeling exists, but can political elites actually create or intensify these feelings just through their rhetoric?
Absolutely. The feeling of victimhood is highly malleable. It's responsive to external cues. An experiment confirmed that elite communications can significantly change the extent to which you feel victimized.
Really?
Subjects were exposed to rhetoric from various political figures, candidates like Donald Trump or Joe Biden, where the figures described the average person's inability to catch a break. This messaging significantly increased both egocentric and systemic victimhood in the listeners, regardless of their existing political affiliation or demographic.
So the rhetoric itself acts as a trigger and a validator. It's telling the listener, your feeling of being cheated is legitimate, and I am the one who sees it.
Precisely. And we can see this strategically applied when looking at voter bases. Consider the case study of support for Donald Trump. His rhetoric, especially his framing of the forgotten man and the shrinking middle class, strongly encourages egocentric victimhood.
Right.
The narrative is, you, the supporter, are being personally denied what you were due. Jobs are being stolen, benefits are flowing to others, and unfairness is targeting your demographic group. This rhetoric attributes blame to specific, often personalized enemies, not necessarily the system itself.
And the data supports the success of that strategy. Higher levels of egocentric victimhood correlate positively with voting for and supporting Trump.
Yes, and here's the key finding that ties back to the blame attribution distinction. Systemic victimhood actually correlates negatively with Trump's support.
Why is that?
Because during his presidency, Trump was the figurehead of the system. If you believe the system is fundamentally designed to oppress you, you are less likely to support the man leading that system. The successful political strategy here relies on appealing to that deeply personal, egocentric sense of being cheated, that internal impulse, rather than necessarily the desire to dismantle established power structures.
And this systematic use of personal unhappiness as political fuel is what we call grievance politics. It's the strategy where leaders deliberately use frustration and resentment to create a loyal, angry group identity, intentionally replacing thoughtful policy debate with these emotional us versus them pleas.
The mechanisms of grievance politics are incredibly simple, which is what makes them so profoundly effective at scale. The first mechanism is simplification. Complicated socioeconomic problems, globalization, economic shifts, infrastructure decay are boiled down into simple stories with clear heroes, us, the true patriots, and cartoonish villains, them, the corrupt elite outsiders. There is no space for nuance.
The second mechanism is scapegoating.
Scapegoating is essential. It's blaming specific groups, immigrants, minorities, political rivals, the media to unify supporters, and, critically, to divert attention from structural issues that are much harder to solve, like deep-seated economic inequality or climate change.
If people are perpetually angry at an external enemy, they won't scrutinize the leader's actual policies.
And the third mechanism is pure political theater, repetition, constantly amplifying those complaints, exaggerating issues, manufacturing outrage to maintain perpetual anger and upset. You have to keep that neural negative superhighway we discussed earlier constantly firing.
It's a powerful, reusable tool in history.
Oh, absolutely. Grievance mobilization is central to populism. We see it in the rhetoric of figures like Adolf Hitler, who leveraged the profound national grievance felt by Germany after World War I and the Great Depression, blaming Jews, communists, and foreign nations for the country's woes.
And others.
The Bolsheviks harnessed the anger and historical grievance of the impoverished masses toward the wealthy landowners and the Tsarist regime. Leaders position themselves as the true, victimized voice of the people, fighting against corrupt, illegitimate elites.
Speaking of strategic victimhood, there's a fascinating and kind of cynical modern inversion of this concept called hijacked victimhood. This is a specific communication strategy used to protect established power.
Hijacked victimhood is a sophisticated rhetorical tool where political leaders intentionally present dominant groups, often those who historically hold or have held the most power, as current or future victims in need of protection.
So they flip the script.
It's strategic victimhood used to defend the status quo against marginalized voices.
So if marginalized groups are making legitimate claims for rights and equality, the rhetoric pivots and says, wait, we are actually the victims of your efforts.
Exactly. The strategy works by reversing the victimizer-victim dichotomy, creating a new moral order where the dominant group is suddenly threatened and under siege. This strategy is highly effective at blunting the rights-based claims of marginalized and subaltern groups.
And it feeds right back into that egocentric victimhood.
It does. The rhetoric, as exemplified by the Trump case study, constructs tangible economic and value-based harms for these dominant groups, claiming affirmative action is discrimination against them, or that immigrants are actively stealing jobs and welfare benefits. It directly supports the egocentric victim who feels personally cheated by societal change.
We've tracked grievance from the wiring of the individual brain to the rhetoric of the political rally. Now we have to shift focus to the cultural environment and the long-term societal cost of institutionalized professional grievance. This moves beyond politics and into civic society itself.
Where it does the most damage, arguably.
Think about that community meeting story. The affluent East Coast suburb trying to address their broken public park. The problem was simple: old, rusty playground equipment. The solution should have been simple: fundraise and fix it.
But it wasn't.
But the meeting dissolved into a stream of complaints. People weren't focused on fixing the park. They were focused on asserting their right to complain. My taxes are too high, the previous contractor was terrible, the kids are too loud. Not a single person offered to do anything.
And that scene is a perfect microcosm of how cultural norms around grievance erode the capacity for collective problem solving. Sociologists Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning argue that the U.S. is currently experiencing a profound moral change, transitioning away from established norms into an emergent victimhood culture.
They identified three primary moral cultures that have existed. Let's clarify those three models.
First, historically, we had honor culture. This culture was built on external reputation. Honor was paramount, and slights were handled directly, often violently, through retaliation dueling, blood feuds, immediate confrontations.
And in that culture, victims had low status.
Critically, yes. To be victimized meant you were weak or incapable of defending yourself.
Okay, next. The dignity culture, which is what characterized most modern Western societies after the Enlightenment.
Dignity culture emphasizes internal worth, equal rights, and tolerance. Conflicts are ideally addressed non-violently, either through legal structures or just quiet, restrained avoidance. The familiar mantra, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me," embodied the core ethos.
Your internal dignity was robust enough to absorb minor slights.
Exactly. Conflict management emphasized self-restraint.
And now, the emergent victimhood culture.
Victimhood culture is a fascinating hybrid. It retains the quickness to take offense, similar to the sensitivity of an honor culture.
But instead of retaliating directly,
The aggrieved party must appeal to third parties, authorities, organizations, the media, social platforms, police, and punish the transgressor. And here is the defining characteristic. This culture confers the highest moral status on victims. The status shifts 180 degrees from honor culture.
so the mechanism of dealing with a slight changes radically. In a dignity culture, you shake it off or address it quietly. In victimhood culture, you publicize the slightest offense and appeal to the court of public opinion for validation and justice.
And this shift fundamentally changes the incentives for behavior. It greatly increases the incentive to publicize grievances, especially through highly public platforms like social media. If your moral standing increases, the more victimized you appear, you are incentivized to find and announce injury constantly.
This environment quickly fosters competitive victimhood.
Yes.
Competitive victimhood, this is where it gets so cynical. It means even privileged people feel compelled to adopt the language and posture of a victim to gain status.
Precisely. Even those with clear social and economic advantages are incentivized to claim victim status, emphasizing their own suffering and innocence to raise their moral standing while simultaneously lowering the moral status of their adversaries, who are cast as the oppressors or the insensitive transgressors.
The dynamic of I am more victimized than you.
And it creates a cultural environment where genuine suffering is often drowned out by performative grievance.
And this creates a devastating paradox, doesn't it? Especially in settings that value equality, like modern diverse institutions. As society makes substantial progress toward equality, the bar for what counts as an offensive slight just drops lower and lower.
It's the constant lowering of the threshold of outrage. When equality and diversity are rightly valued, any perceived offense against those values becomes the most severe moral transgression. The threshold shifts constantly, allowing participants, even in relatively safe and privileged settings, to maintain a constant level of anger and perceived victimization.
So the culture is structurally rewarding the identity of being damaged or aggrieved.
Which leads to constant low-level friction rather than unified progress. The park meeting example proves this. The focus shifts from the shared civic goal to the individual's perceived right to be comfortable, untaxed, and unbothered.
And this pervasive sense of political and cultural grievance is just fundamentally warping our public discourse. We're not engaging in the hard work of democracy anymore. We're stuck in an exchange of amplified insults, reinforcing that us versus them dichotomy.
The climate of political debate is judged extremely harshly by the American public. Large majorities report that the tone is now more negative, less respectful, less fact-based, and far less substantive than in decades past.
I believe it.
And crucially, half of Americans now find talking about politics, even with those they disagree with, to be stressful and frustrating. And when discourse feels stressful and frustrating, what happens? The average citizen withdraws.
And the risk of this escalating aggression isn't just discomfort. It is tangible political violence.
There is broad agreement on the dangers of normalizing aggressive rhetoric. A substantial majority, 78%, believes that heated or aggressive language directed by elected officials against certain people or groups makes violence against them more likely. The rhetoric, designed to inflame grievance, leaks into reality.
And the emotional tax on the public is massive.
It is. Sizable majorities report profoundly negative personal reactions to political rhetoric. 76% feel concerned, 70% confused, 69% embarrassed, and 67% exhausted. This manufactured constant grievance is actively draining the emotional reserves of the citizenry.
And this stress is amplified by the classic partisan double standard. It's not just that everyone is angry, it's that both sides believe their anger is justified and moral, while the opponent's anger is cynical and destructive.
This phenomenon, driven by deep-seated in-group out-group bias, is systematically measurable. Both Republicans and Democrats demand a far higher standard of conduct from the opposing party than they apply to their own officials.
For instance,
For example, most Republicans might say it is unacceptable for a Democratic official to use a slur like stupid against a Republican opponent, but a significantly smaller percentage will say it's unacceptable for their own Republican official to use that same slur against a Democrat, and vice versa.
so we're actively participating in the creation of our own grievance bubble, where we constantly give our own side a pass, while simultaneously feeling victimized by the other side's identical behavior.
Exactly. The brain applies cognitive dissonance and in-group favoritism to shield the integrity of the group. If my leader uses aggressive language, my brain rationalizes it as justified defense or, necessary bluntness. If your leader uses that same aggressive language, my brain flags it as immoral aggression.
Which just perpetuates the cycle of competitive grievance.
It justifies our continued sense that we are the victims of the other side's unfair, low-class, and aggressive conduct.
When all these forces, the psychological rumination, the political weaponization, and the cultural normalization of victimhood come together, the result is the erosion of democratic function. We saw it in the park meeting. We see it nationally.
Grievance-driven politics forces division and replaces negotiation with zero-sum antagonism. It makes people view politics not as a mechanism for compromise, but as an existential battle where one group must be defeated entirely for the other to survive.
And that radically weakens the trust and unity necessary for effective governance.
When people feel perpetually wronged and under attack, they stop trusting systems.
And instead of solving the root causes of national anxiety, whether it's economic insecurity, globalization, or decaying infrastructure, governments focused on grievance prioritize cultural fighting and battles over symbols.
And this strategic deflection is incredibly damaging. Institutions essential for democratic stability, the courts, the media, legislatures, even voting processes, are constantly painted as enemies of the people, leading to a profound systemic loss of faith.
And when that faith is gone,
When the collective sense of being wronged becomes overwhelming and the existing system is dismissed as corrupt or hostile, people seek radical alternative.
this feeds into a very dangerous historical precedent. The feeling of hyper-victimization has historically caused people to turn to authoritarian regimes for the promise of swift, authoritative relief.
As noted by sociologist Philip Converse, widespread support for movements like the Nazi Party was often not based on a deep ideological commitment to their core principles, but on rhetoric that appealed directly to a deep, generalized sense of historical victimhood, promising to restore greatness and provide relief from crushing debt and national humiliation.
So the appeal to victimhood itself isn't new.
Not at all. It's been used by many political movements, but it poses a severe normative threat when mobilized to extreme, constant lengths, creating a public that is willing to trade democratic norms for the promise of rescue from their perpetual feeling of being wronged.
What a detailed, sometimes uncomfortable journey. We started with two privileged strangers in an airport lounge, finding perfect, unrecognized harmony in their entitlement.
A perfect starting point.
And we've seen how this impulse is simultaneously a self-inflicted psychological wound, that trap of rumination and learned negative neuroplasticity, and a powerful, deliberately engineered political force used to construct loyal identities, win elections, and freeze democratic function.
And we understand now that whether it's egocentric complaints about personally deserving more or systemic blaming of powerful structures, the pervasive culture of seeking victim status fundamentally reshapes our brains. It paralyzes collective action in spaces like that park meeting, and it makes productive, substantive discourse increasingly difficult. It is a system built to maintain perpetual conflict by design, making us all poorer psychologically, civically, and morally the more we choose to participate.